So now I'm going to diagram some things to keep in mind while you are working on your sphere. Number one I'm going to talk about is reflected light. So sometimes we think that reflected light is a little patch of light over here on the shadow side. Sometimes we even draw it or erase it out. And so we're not going to do that for this exercise. We're going to fill all of this area in 80%. And then when you start turning form, you make this 100% right here. That automatically makes everything else appear lighter. If you think about it, if the light's all coming down from this direction, it's hitting the surface that the sphere is sitting on and bouncing up to the underside of the sphere, not just on this back side, but every part of the underside of the sphere is receiving reflected light from the floor. That means that this part right here, just above the midpoint of the sphere, so if this line crosses it in half, just above the midpoint of the sphere, it's not getting any ambient light from the rest of the room, and it's not getting any light from here. We're imagining ourselves as an audience sitting in a stage, and the sphere is up on a stage, and the audience is dark. The audience is very black. And so there's going to be no light there because there is nowhere for light to come from to hit there. There's no reflected light or bouncing light hitting that spot. So that's why that's going to be one of your darkest areas. That means that the terminator is going to be, even the terminator itself down here is going to be a little bit lighter than how the terminator appears up here. They're both going to have soft leading edges, soft edges that point up towards the light all along the terminator, but this is going to be the darkest part of the terminator. And the entire underside of the sphere is going to be getting reflected light, but we don't need to erase it out because we filled in all of our values 80%. So making this 100% means the rest of it is left 80%, and that will appear as reflected light without actually having to put it in, okay? So reflected light is not another flashlight shining on this back side of the sphere. Reflected light is not stuck to this edge. The reflected light is not a patch of lightness that's there. Reflected light is a glow that comes up from the entire surface and bounces on the underside of the entire sphere. Okay, the next place that's going to be the darkest part, if you imagine the sphere rolling under, right down in here, no light can hit because that's right where the sphere touches the surface. And since light can't bend, it can bounce off the floor, but it can't bend, it can't come around and shine under there. And so since light can't bend, it can't get into that tiny little crevice underneath the sphere. If you think of the sphere as round and three-dimensional and coming out round towards you, and this is the part that's closest to you, this part is tucking under and rolling under, and for that reason there's a little crack down under there, a little teeny tiny area that light can't get. That means that this whole area is going to roll up to the underside of the sphere, so it's going to be soft on top. It's going to roll out on every direction. It's going to get a little bit lighter as it goes from 100% to 80%. So essentially, this little patch at the base of the sphere with nice soft edges transitioning from 100% value to 80% value is going to be the darkest part of your sphere. And this part of the sphere right here, where we can get no ambient light from the room and no reflected light from the floor, this part is going to be the darkest part. So this part and this part are the darkest part of your sphere, and there's going to be no line and no grayness and no white line and no gray line and no separation, nothing in there except for just going from 80% to 100% to 80% as it goes out there. All right? The other thing I want to talk about is the position of the highlight on the sphere so we can get really clear about what's going on with that highlight. All right, so we've got our sphere. Got a little scribbling on the paper from previously. Take that off. All right, so we've got our sphere. As you know, as we talked about in the outlines exercise, this is essentially a hula hoop around the middle section of the sphere, the exact halfway point of the sphere. We're seeing the front edge of this hula hoop. So sometimes, and then the highlight is about here. All right, the highlight is actually a little bit closer to us than we would expect. It's not stuck to the edge, it's right about there. Now sometimes that means that we tend to shade up here and leave it a little bit too light right there in the middle. What we want to keep in mind though is that roughly, if you want to measure by eye, a 1/4 inch up, if you imagine another hula hoop coming up and another hula hoop coming up, in concentric circles, We're going to go all the way up to the top. And what we're going to notice is that the highlight is not in the center of the sphere, right? So the very physical center of the sphere, the top of the sphere that's closest to the light, is right about there. It's just a little bit in from the edge because the sphere, the light source is turned a little bit away from us. It's coming out from front. Therefore, the terminator of the sphere is turned a little bit back. So the middle point of the sphere would be just visible if we had put a dot on that part of the sphere that is closest to pointing straight up towards the light source. However, the highlight, due to reflective qualities of the surface, the highlight is actually sort of a little mirror. And if you set up an egg or a shiny object and you move your head around while you're looking at it, you will notice that the highlight will tend to follow you where you move your head. That's because the highlight behaves differently than every single other part of light on the sphere. Other parts of light in the sphere are actually stuck to the surface of the sphere. The shadow is always going to be at that point. If the light doesn't move, it's always going to stay there. The highlight, however, is a little bit closer to us because it's actually a reflection of the light, comes down, hits that surface, and goes into our eye. A shinier object will have a lighter, brighter highlight right there, but we're picturing a nice matte surface on our sphere, so it's not going to be very light or bright. But therefore, these hula hoops, however, which are marking the same spot on the sphere all the way around it, are going to be equidistant, and they're not going to be influenced by this highlight right here. So that means that this whole zone all along this first hula hoop going up towards the light is going to be the same value of gray at that point. All the same value of gray at that point. And then this next hula hoop up is going to be the same value of gray all at that point. So it's going to be nice and dark near the terminator. Every millimeter it's getting lighter, 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 lighter. That's why we don't shade in bands or stripes around the sphere, because this is not a zone, this is not an area of value, this is not a halftone, this is what we call dark light, and dark light is changing, changing, changing every fraction of a millimeter. So it's darkest right here, and it gets lighter as it goes up, lighter as it goes up, lighter as it goes up. So even within this little area here, we've got a gradient going from darkest dark up to a little bit lighter, and then from here up to a little bit lighter. What we want to avoid is having the tendency to fill in our shading on the edges all the way up to there. And sometimes, because the highlight is a little closer to us, we might think that that is happening, but we want to avoid that happening. What that does is that implies that the light source is way over here, and that would imply that your terminator should be way back here. To keep the angle of the light in the right spot, we're going to keep all of these values the same. Everything along this line is going to be the same. Everything on that line is going to be the same. Darkest at the terminator and getting lighter, 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 lighter as it goes up to the top. And we are not going to fill in the edges of our sphere darker up here. All right? So all of your turning form is going to happen pretty quickly. And your sphere is going to look nice and light and bright and like it's a white sphere and a white light. If you turn form quickly, that means it's nice and dark next to the terminator, and it's a smooth gradation up towards the light, but it ends way before we get to the highlight. We don't have any shading around the highlight. We want the highlight to feel nice and bright and light and glowing, and without any feeling that it's being strangled by the shading. We want to end all our shading well before we get to the highlight, but in our mind we want to know exactly where that highlight is. All right? So just to recap, reflected light is everything in the entire bottom of the sphere. This is your darkest spot. This is your darkest spot. From the terminator, you turn up to the light at the same rate all along the entire edge of this entire terminator, 1/4 inch up towards the light from the terminator. Along every point is going to be the same value. Roll up, roll up, roll up, roll up. Okay? So keep those in mind. You can go ahead and shade and finish your sphere after you've gotten approval for this stage. You're going to use only HB, H, and 2H. And once you've gotten to this stage and you lightened all your lines so that they're not visually cluttering your page, you're going to start right here, start with an H pencil right here, and start shading up towards the light in a little soft cloud, and you're going to keep doing that all along the terminator here, keeping in mind that you're going to have 100% here and 100% here and 80% everywhere else.